this is the seventh lecture of my course, OLLI course, and the sixth one was on conventional economics, how economists and financial people and whatever think of economics. And I made in a review last week of this, I made two main points. Number one, that economics that we teach, that we think about now, is based on only one of maybe five or six principal ways that people have thought about economics over the last several hundred years, during the period of time in which there was anything resembling uh, a formal schools of economics. So the way we look at economics is just one of many ways. And the second is, for actually all of these ways, essentially, it is considered a social science. And so a main point that we will be looking at today is what is the potential role of the natural sciences as well as the social sciences in economics. That if you listen to an economist, they will not use any of the natural sciences in examining economics. And so I think this is a critical perspective. And I suppose the third point I made, and I will make more strongly today, is that conventional economics generally fails in what it does in its examination of how economies operate. But it doesn't matter because the economists have sort of circled their wagons and said, this is what we think economics is. Don't bother me with where it doesn't work. Uh, Now, there are exceptions to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay. So we're going to have a critique of conventional economics and the need for biophysical economics. What is biophysical economics? It's very straightforward. It's economics that considers the natural sciences as well as the social sciences as its base. Now, for a long time, say 1940 to 1973, neoclassical and even Keynesian economics seemed to work. People tended to be more wealthy each year, depressions were minor, and they were cured with government spending. The United States got out of the Great Depression, which so influenced my parents. Um, they got out of the Depression by not from exactly Keynesian spending, but from war spending. And we spent so much money in such deficit spending that was war bonds and stuff. I had one as a little kid. And
Yeah,
yes, Beverly.
I'll be rich when I find it, honey.
Lily, you'll be
Oh,
surprised.
Beverly, would you shut off uh, your audio, please? And unless you have a question. And so it looked like economics worked well until 1973, and we know exactly what happened in 1973. That was the first oil crisis shock. And then we had a second one in 1979, and it seemed like all the economic rules no longer worked. So let's start where we ended last time with a consideration of some of the unresolved issues with conventional, that is, neoclassical economics. So here are some major problems with conventional economics today. First of all, unequal distribution. This is not necessarily a failure of economics as much as a failure of the political system, or you can carve that either way you want. The failure of the Phillips curve, secular stagnation, explanation of the solar residual, inflation, externalities such as environmental problems. These all have a biophysical basis. Maybe distribution is not exactly that, or although it is also. So we're going to look at these as an indication of how conventional economics, conventional meaning neoclassical, how that fails. Neoclassical, looking at the intersections of the curves of demand and supply. Now, the first thing is the distribution of income. And the green line from 1962 to 2016, and these lines would continue if I updated them. The bottom 50% of income earners used to get 20% of the income. They were poor, but they weren't that much poor. But they have now get only 12%, roughly half of what they did in 1971. And the top 1% now get 20% of the income. They used to get 10% of the income. Now they get 20%. The rich have become richer. The poor have become poorer in the United States. Okay, is this a political problem or an economic problem? Now, the Phillips curve is an economic concept that's important and it's used just in the last year. I heard they didn't use the term Phillips curve, but they use a concept that there is an inverse relation between employment and inflation. And I'll show you where that is. This is the Phillips curve in theory, that as the number of people unemployed in this case goes down below 3%, the inflation will increase dramatically. Now, this curve, a theoretical curve, was used, for example, in the 1970s when inflation went through the roof. They deliberately increased the unemployment. They decreased employment by various ways in order to decrease inflation, because they thought inflation was a bigger problem, at least political problem, than unemployment, because the unemployed were not the majority of voters, I suppose. And this is the theory, but this is what happened. You can see how from 1961 down the bottom to 1969, the Phillips curve worked almost perfectly. But then it got a little bit dicier in the early 70s, and then the oil crisis hit in, and the price of oil increased by a factor of 5 and 10. And this was because the production of oil in the United States had peaked, and all of a sudden the external suppliers such as Saudi Arabia had a lot more power over the price of oil. And both inflation and unemployment increased. This was not supposed to happen, but it sure did. So what this is showing is that the supply of oil, supply meaning essentially its price, had enormous impact on basic economic properties of the United States. And the economists absolutely could not explain it. They said, I don't understand why the Phillips curve is no longer working, even though to somebody who had a biophysical perspective, it was bloody obvious that inflation had to increase because you had to use more expensive oil to produce each item. And unemployment was increasing because there was not as much money in the society to hire them. Very simple. Now, secular stagnation. If you go to Europe and you talk to economists in Europe, they will talk about secular stagnation. Maybe that will be the first thing they'll talk about in Germany or France or whatever. And that is simply the growth rate has gone down from around 5% a year down to about 1%, depending where you are. OECD means the rich industrialized countries, and economists can't explain it. They think growth should be 5% a year. Well, why is growth now only 1% a year? And I'll give an explanation to that in a moment. Here's the declining rate of the United States GDP has gone down to 1% or 2% a year. Used to be, even though with greater fluctuations, which we discussed with Keynesian economics, the fluctuations have decreased, but also so has the growth rate. We used to say that people would get richer than their parents. That no longer can be said. Now, the problem, of course, is that this is the growth rate of petroleum. So we no longer put 10%, 5 or 10% more petroleum into our economy each year. It's very obvious and very simple for those of the biophysical perspective. Biophysical meaning the production of wealth depends on how much energy you use. And the debt, people have tried to compensate this with both government and private debt. The private debt is the difference between government and, that's credit card debt and so forth. So debt tends to be blamed on the Democrats, but the Reagan, Bush, and Trump administrations, and not to mention Obama, etc., debt has increased so much more as a percentage from in these administrations than was the case, for example, with Franklin Roosevelt, who had a war to fight and was considered to be an enormous creator of debt. So, and now we're living with it now. Now, how can we repay this debt? We're going to have to talk about that a little bit. If I don't, we'll make sure we do. Now, another failure of conventional economics is what's called the Cobb-Douglas production function, which which the economists say the quantity of production of goods and services, in other words, the GDP, is a function of labor and capital. Now, for a physicist, this would be absurd. If you said to a physicist, how do you make something? He'd say, how do you make an economic product, a hamburger or a coffee cup or whatever? And he said, well, you start with some stuff and you apply some energy to it and, and then you make something. Well, you notice the social scientists, the economists, had only labor and capital in there, no energy. And a guy named Denison analyzed this to pieces, and they had what was called Solo's residual. Solo was an important economist, and he said when you look at the increase in labor and the increase in capital, you can explain only half of the increase, or less than half in the increase of GDP. Well, we'll talk about that. Meanwhile, the most important issues were ignored: population growth, depletion, climate change, environmental destruction. These were externalities. They were small, unimportant things in the literature of economists. While the human population growth was going like crazy, just to tell you, that's where I was born, 1943. So the population is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, I don't know, 4 times larger than when I was born. And the frequency of the most intense hurricanes and many other environmental parameters has increased over time. It'd be pretty big in the last half decade. Why is this so? Well, an economist who named oh, I'm having a I'll come up with him. Came up with the concept of what he called the intellectual isolation of economics. That the economists basically talked only to themselves. They were all social scientists. In order to get tenure at an Ivy League university, you had to be a conventional neoclassical economist. You couldn't be any other kind, barely a Keynesian, and certainly not a Marxist, but those are social scientists too. And certainly not a biophysical economist. Hardly anyone mentions the main driver of economic growth, which is industrialization. Look at that. Here's where wealth comes from, is this massive use of petroleum meaning oil and gas, to generate products, goods and services. And these kinds of concentrations are found in, every major wealthy country of the world. And if you look at the production of wealth, which is the dotted line of GDP in constant dollars, is the secret is very obvious. It's right there in front of you. It's the increased use of fossil fuels and a little bit of renewable energy, hydro, and now increasingly, but not very much increasingly, wind turbines and so forth. So that's biophysical. That's how we generate more wealth. We use more energy. And we wrote a paper about this back in 1984, published this as a cover issue of Science magazine. It's a really good paper. And we looked at the increase of GNP and the increased use of fuel energy use, and it's almost exactly the same curve, as is the rate of change one year to the next. The first difference, or first derivative, if you wish, of the production of wealth. And I'll send this paper to anybody who wants. It's just, we laid it out very clearly in 1984. It's the best place you can do this. And it landed in the lap of the economists with an enormous zero. They paid zero attention to this paper and many others of that sort. If you look at of developing countries, Korea, Mexico, Netherlands, as they increased in wealth on the y-axis, it was with an increase in energy use on the axis. USA is a little more complicated. We might talk about that, but Costa Rica had no increase in energy use and per capita, and no increase in wealth, just as an example. So, development economics, how do you develop? How do you get a poor country richer? You use more energy. I know of essentially no counterexamples. Certainly, some economists recognize the obvious fact that conventional economics was making a huge logical and applied error by not considering energy and resources more explicit, and doing so in physical, not just price terms, but the center of gravity of conventional economics made no mention of this. The name I was looking for was Leontiev. He was a great an economist who greatly helped the United States win World War II. A Russian economist who come here and helped us understand how all the different parts of the economy were connected so that when you were building landing crafts to make sure that you had enough brass fittings to make the landing crafts work, for example, we owe that to Leontief. And he said that conventional economists were unable to advance in any perceptible way a systematic understanding of the operation of a real economic system. Instead, he said they were based on sets of more or less plausible but entirely arbitrary assumptions, leading to precisely stated but irrelevant theoretical conclusions. That's the view of one Nobel Prize winning economist of his field in general. And we can find other such quotes. Not many, because most economists pay no attention to Leontief. Leontief extolled other investigators in demography, sociology, political science, ecology, biology, health, et cetera, to remove economics from the splendid isolation in which it is found. Well, me as an economist, as an ecologist, and others have attempted to do this, and we've made zero impact on the core of thinking of economists. So let's respond to Leontief's challenge and try to generate some resolution to these issues. We start with the intellectual isolation of economics, especially its ignorance of and ignoring of the most basic laws of physics. So the first question, if you say, what is economics? Well, from the economists, they say economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources among competing ends. And note that to an economist, resources is not what I think you might think of water or soil or oil or whatever. Resources to them means money in your wallet. That's all. This is a social definition of economics. It implies that scarcity is only relative scarcity. That is, humans, it also implies that humans are rational, quote unquote. Firms, households, and markets are all that you need to make a legitimate economic analysis or understanding. Solow said you could drop from a helicopter an economist into any place on earth and they would be able to understand the economy without any understanding of the natural resources, the climate, or whatever. And this incidentally ignores the first 200 years of economic thinking. It's very interesting. So here we go. Tell me the fairy tale about the economy. Well, that's conventional economics. If you have a son or daughter who's learning economics in university, now this is what they're learning, fairy tales. And so in the neoclassical worldview, wealth comes from capital only. This is the firm that you'll find in chapter 1 of any economics textbook, except ours. Well, you find it there too. That households generate land, labor, and capital, which they give to firms. Firms give goods and services to households, and the money goes around in the opposite direction. That's it. That's the diagram of an economy. It's a perpetual motion machine. It requires no inputs. It has no outputs except GNP. And that's it. Well, we thought this was absolutely insane, as did Herman Daly, who first postulated this. We believe it uses incorrect boundaries, is inconsistent with the laws of thermodynamics. Such a system cannot exist, and is largely based on articles of faith rather than empirically validated science. And we've written many, many papers on this, which I am happy to supply you with if you want. Reality is different. So I like this picture by Jerome. Jerome. Truth coming out of her well to shame mankind. This is how economies work. It says here capitalism, but it's just as true for socialism or Marxism or whatever. And what we have here is various, let's call them industry captains, if you will, and they're taking resources from the earth. And here you have forests and water bodies and birds and fish and armadillos and whatever. And they're going into this gigantic maw of industrialization and generating wealth. And that's how economies work. Another way of looking at it is in this cartoon. Natural resources and global cheap labor is swept up in this machine that's called free trade and globalization. And our consumer stuff comes out the side, and pollution and environmental destruction is left behind. There's just no way we can make stuff, consumer stuff, without exploiting the resources and leaving behind pollution and air pollution. It just doesn't work that way. It works the way this cartoon indicates, more or less. There are small exceptions, not large ones, and you might try to trick me with exceptions, and let's see, maybe you can. Quite simply, wealth is generated by using fossil energy, a little bit of solar energy, to exploit the Earth's raw materials and transform them into what we want. And we do this through cycles of resource exploitation. Now, here's a example that I just give. How do we generate wealth? Well, with tractors and diggers and diesel-powered ships, and move it up and down Route 5 on these trucks and deliver it to our homes and UPS. All of these using petroleum, not to mention aluminum and iron and copper and any number of other things. Here's digging a fence hole, whatever. It's a great book by Alice Friedemann, When Trucks Stop Running. And if you want to understand in very straightforward and easy to understand terms, you can look at Alice, I think, has two books by now, really good. They're not expensive, $50, I think, on Amazon. And so here are cycles of exploitation, and this is data. And I did some work in Ecuador. Here we have different cycles of exploitation. And this is the data of the tons produced, units produced for each of these different things. And you see that trawled shrimp, wild shrimp, were doing fine, and then we're overfished. And then pelagic fish, meaning fish out in the ocean, the fishery increased, and then was overexploited and dropped. Bananas increased until the banana disease came in. Shrimp in ponds had a tremendous pulse. You might have seen where the mangroves were transformed into shrimp ponds. And then the white spot disease came in, and that was the end of that fishery. Coffee did very well until coffee rust came in, and that dropped down. The big one is oil production, which has peaked now and is right now about here, a little of the way down. And oil consumption is increasing as all of this is driven by using more and more oil to exploit the other resources to try to generate some wealth for a growing population. It's a tough situation, but that's what, and there's a book by Nafeez Ahmed, really wonderful book, about how these kinds of cycles occur again and again and again until the oil goes down he looks at Syria, Egypt, Nigeria, and so forth, and then you go into economic chaos. So it's neither labor nor capital that generates wealth, as the neoclassical model implies, but nature. And nature is the source, and we exploit the energies to exploit other resources. But most of today's economics doesn't ask any questions about this. It's mostly about mathematics. And as the economist Paul Krugman, is an economist I like, said, as I see it, the economist profession went astray because economists as a group mistook beauty clad in impressive looking mathematics for truth. A nice allusion on Keats' term, Ode on a Grecian urn. And central cause of the profession's failure was a desire for an all-encompassing, intellectually elegant approach that also gave economists a chance to show off their mathematical prowess. Now, these are the people that are ruling your life in how economic decisions are made all around the world, and in Washington, D.C., and in Portland, Oregon. So Heinrich and Guinness, I really like this guy Gintis, and I can provide all the details of this if you want, but they found out experimental economists and others have uncovered large and consistent deviations from the textbook representations of Homo economicus, that is, the rational human being that economists assume we are. They've done hundreds of experiments in dozens of countries to suggest that people don't make what economists call rational decisions. They're interested about fairness and reciprocity and are willing to take material loss at cost to themselves and to reward those who act in a pro-social manner while punishing those who do not, even when those actions are costly. People will punish people at a material expense to them if they don't play by what they perceive to be fair rules, socially fair rules, not economically fair rules. Okay, the antidote, well, we present that biophysical economics. I represent a loose group of perhaps several hundred scientists and economists and others, business people especially, who believe that we need a very different approach to economics. And we have a website, www.bpeinstitute.org. You can go take a look. We have this book by myself and economic historian Kent Klitgard. And this basically reviews the material that is in this lecture, but gives you a lot more detail and a lot more references. But let's start this way. If you talk to an average person and ask, what does economics mean to you? Will they talk about capital and labor, and even sometimes, well, they will talk about money in a way, as well. But they'll normally answer, well, it's food on the table and a roof over my head, perhaps a car in the garage. It's about stuff. That's what economics is mostly about, stuff and activities. Stuff and activities live in the material world where we study it using natural resources, but conventional economists do not. So we want to bring the natural sciences to the study of how economies work. And the most importantly, why is economics, which is mostly about stuff, taught as a social science? I have no clue. It's just a historical accident. If you go back to the origin of economics, the physiocrats, they understood it was about stuff and how the land helped you make it. So we need to kind of update that. If you think about it, the the original economists, the physiocrats, thought about land as a source of wealth. The classical economists, Adam Smith and Ricardo and Mills and so forth, thought about labor. And Solow and neoclassical economists think about capital. But if you think about them, they were each the major energy flow of the time. That is, the classical economists, I'm sorry, the physiocrats thought about land which captured solar energy. That was the main source of wealth at the time. When people were brought together into factories and made things in factories, economists thought about labor, but it was the physical work of human muscles that was making wealth at the time. And when Solow's talking about capital, what is capital? Capital is the means of using energy, fossil energy. So they're all talking about the major economic, the major energy sources to the economies of their time, but they have blinders on their eyes because they don't think in and they're not trained in the conventional natural sciences. It's crazy. Okay, biophysical economics is an increasingly vocal subset of economists and others that has focused on the internal logical and empirical inconsistencies of the basic neoclassical theoretical model, and especially the failure of that model to represent reality or to be consistent with known laws of behavioral, biological, and physical science. And many economists and natural scientists, including ourselves, consider modern economics to be an ideology wrapped in a blanket of near impenetrable jargon and mathematics with only a tenuous or at best extremely incomplete relation to the biophysical world in which it must rest. There are. Okay. So our first question is re-answered. What is economics? Economics is the study of the use of fossil energy, exploit the Earth's raw materials, and transform them into what we want. One of the most important things to bring home from biophysical economics is money is a lien on energy. I should have a dollar bill here. I forgot to get it ready. Money is a lien on energy. Each dollar allows you access to about 5 megajoules of work. That's roughly half a coffee cup of oil is 5 megajoules. No energy, no economic products. So if you buy a bagel, let's say you buy a bagel let's get a good one. Let's get a bagel in New York City. How does that bagel get there? Well, it starts with a gas well in Louisiana. And the gas is taken out of the ground, and a great deal of it is used to run the Haber process to make nitrogen fertilizer. You can't have wheat, you can't have bagel or not much of one without using fertilizer because the land is long worn out. And so you take that fertilizer that you made, the ammonium nitrate that you made in just south between Baton Rouge and New Orleans in Louisiana, in the big petrochemical camps there, and you put them on a barge and barge them up against the current, the Mississippi River to Nebraska. And then you load that bag of fertilizer into a truck and you distribute it to the farmers. The farmers take the bag of fertilizer put it into a fertilizer dispenser, put diesel in their tractor, and distribute it over the soil. And then they might run the tractor over the soil once or twice to cultivate it, to take care of the weeds, or to put on another petroleum-derived pesticide. And then they use that tractor again to harvest the wheat. They take it to a railroad center and grind the wheat into flour and put the flour into a bag and put the bag on a train. Using diesel, they take it to New York City and they use electricity derived from various sources to mix the batter. And then they use natural gas to heat the oven and cook the bagel and maybe boil water to give it the final touch. And then you buy a bagel, and if you buy it for $1, that would be a good price in New York these days. But if you buy a bagel for $1, then it's used about 5 megajoules, half a coffee cup's worth of oil in that big transaction to make one bagel. Probably half a bagel today. Coffee cups full of oil to make one bagel. In Ashland, that would apply as well. And let's not talk about lox, which is much more energy intensive to catch or raise a salmon. And all these things have been studied. We know these things are true. So here's how, in a standard economic view of the US economy, and this is the average for one person for 1 year. I think we did this back in 1990. $3,000 worth of capital and 2,000 hours of labor. That's how long a person works roughly in a year to make $23,000 of GDP in 1990. This is their view of the economy. Well, that's absurd. Economy doesn't work that way. Here is how a biophysical economist looked at it. To do this for one person for 1 year, in other words, the same process that you're looking at. This is the raw materials that need to be used for one person for 1 year. 2,500 kilograms of oil, 3,000 of coal, 2,000 of gas, some hydro and nuclear and some biomass, 140,000 kilograms of water per person, 1,000 of wood, 81,000 of rock in some way, 186 of iron, other metals, 43 kilograms, lost soil, cement, etc. And the output is CO2, 89,000 for one person, kilograms, 89 tons, if you will, particulates, SOx, NOx, volatile organic compounds, polluted water, toxins. This is how the economy works. It's not just capital and labor as inputs. It's all this energy and stuff is required to make the economy work for one American in 1990. It's about the same today. That's a biophysical view of how the economy actually works. Second question, what is wealth and where does wealth come from? Okay, we've talked about this. Money is our usual measure of wealth. You can print more wealth, more money, but that doesn't make us richer. It just makes inflation, as Louis XVI found out and others. So some people think we should use a harder measure, such as gold. Now, here's gold in Spain. And so in 1500, Spaniards doubled the quantity of gold in the old world by exploiting with horrible human consequences the gold in this world, or the gold that's in the office of our present president, if you've seen those pictures. But that gold is very, very energy intensive because the gold molecules per molecule of gold ore are very, very small, so it takes a huge amount of energy to make that gold, but it's only a representative. The real wealth in Europe back in 1500 was the energy used from the sun, rain, and wind, and from the activity of foresters, fishermen, farmers, housewives, artisans, etc., who did the physical world to generate the wealth. Doubling the gold was no different from uh, turning the printing press and printing more money, halved its value. Um, for why is this view operational? I don't know. For everyone who wants environmental constraints, there are, I don't know, a dozen, 100, whatever, who want to grow the economy. Every economist, every politician runs on a platform of growing the economy, as far as I can see. And how do you grow the economy? Use more energy. And this goes all the way back in our human history. Here's a cartoon I like. And these two cave people are sitting in a tree. And there go the Wilsons. Seems like everyone's evolving except us. But look what he's got. Fire, which is obviously energy. And we've talked about that and its importance for cooking. And a spear point as a force concentrating device. So even in these cartoons, people don't understand they're talking about energy, but we are. And today, of course, the main energy is fossil fuels. And this is just a look at the GDP. This was in 1998. Same is true today. If you look at different countries of the world, going up, the USA being richest at that moment, and this is how much GDP they have, and this is how much oil they use, or energy as expressed as oil, and the other industrialized countries up here. So remember this graph? This is how the economists view a diagram of the economy. And this, here it is, the real economy. This is how real economies work. Well, you need to have energy sources. The sun, geophysical, and nuclear are the energy sources to the earth, to where we live. Then you need raw materials. And so the most important work that occurs in our economy is the proper functioning of the hydrological cycle driven by the sun. Well, do economists consider this? No. Conventional economists? No, because nobody pays for the sun to do its work. They only look where payments occur. But this is the most critical issue to the proper functioning of our economy. Now, ancient ecosystems laid down energy in matter and fossil fuels and in concentrated minerals, various ways. And then the next step where humans come in now is exploitation. A farm where you clear the land and you put out your cows or your crops and put a dam across a river. You get an oil well to exploit the fossil fuels, or you dig out the minerals or the coal. And then the next step is processing, a butcher block. These are all energy using steps: a sawmill, a petroleum refinery, an electricity production plant, a Bessemer steel factory. You manufacture food and materials and everything that we use, and then consumption. This little line here is where most economists begin the process. They look at the markets where things are sold. And they say, well, that's economics. Well, you need the whole biophysical food chain to generate a real economic system. So there's a diagram of how the economy really works. And it all ends up as heat due to the second law of thermodynamics and in the trash pile. There's a same diagram in color. And so the world oil supply is growing lower and lower, as is the world GDP growth. Why? Less energy, less economic work. But we're supposed to be becoming more efficient, aren't we? Well, not really. You have to, incidentally, this is an aside, you have to correct the official estimates from one year to the next of inflation to correct GDP from one year to the next. And there's a whole suite of issues we can talk about that governments tend to cook the books a little bit on inflation. Inflation is a little higher than
Oh,
when you do that, then most of the supposed improvement in efficiency goes away. That's a different story, but we can talk about it if you want. Secular stagnation, especially in Europe and Japan, is a very important issue. Economies have ceased to grow for many reasons, but mostly for using less energy. And so there are many basic neoclassical economic analyses that can be explained much better from a biophysical perspective, including inflation, stagflation, labor productivity, Cobb-Douglas production functions, Phillips curve. Do the economists pay any attention to what we say? No. Zero. Here's labor productivity. How do we increase labor productivity? You hear people talking about labor productivity. Well, you use more fuel use per worker hour. And when in the 70s energy became much more expensive, we used less energy and labor productivity declined. Oh, what about that? The Cobb-Douglas production function, Solow said half of production is unexplained by capital labor, of course, because it ignores the most important element, which is energy. And when my colleague Reinhard Kummel, a German fellow physicist, included energy in Cobb-Douglas production functions, the Solow residual went away. Energy explains the economy much better than anything else. Now, remember the limits to growth model in 1970. The limits to growth model, dismissed by economists, was in fact a pretty good predictor 50 years later. If you look at the predictions of the limits to growth model made in 1970, they're pretty much on target today. The dotted lines are the original predictions. The red lines are the data today. So most of our economic and financial theories were derived while our energy input to our economies was increasing. The current US and global oil energy situation is stagnant, is flat, pretty much. What economic theories are appropriate here? We know this decline has to happen. The fossil fuels are not there in the earth. Exactly when they occur, we're not sure, but they have to happen inevitably. So I hope I have shown you that, one, real economies need to be studied as biophysical systems using quantitative natural sciences. Two, the evolution of human society has been mostly about sequestering, gathering, and using more energy. That fossil fuels, and especially oil, are the main reasons that human numbers and economies have grown. Four, human societies cannot possibly be sustainable at anything like our present level without a large flow of cheap, i.e. high ROI, energy return on investment energy. that the availability of oil in the immediate future is of considerable concern, that this may be our greatest issue related to sustainability of humans and civilization. And as far as I know, only myself and a limited number of others, and almost no economists or people discussing sustainability, think this way. So where are we now with economics? We're stuck in a hodgepodge of these economic concepts accentuated by political oddities and enthusiasms. It's certainly the case now. President Biden was essentially a neo-Keynesian with his rebuilding America infrastructure concepts. Probably pretty good idea. The Federal Reserve is attempting to tamp down some of the resultant inflation. Modestly successful. We'll see about the next couple of years. And we are left with a legacy of Reagan Bush past tax cuts, so we can't pay for what people expect from governments. And if we pay for it with debt, remember, money, including debt, is a lien on energy. So if we say we owe some bank or entity $1 billion, or 50 billion, as the case is now, you got to multiply that by 5 megajoules per dollar. Where's the energy to pay off the debts coming from? So John Maynard Keynes said practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. This was said in 1930 or so. Here we are. So we're on this burst of fossil fuel use. I don't know if 2025 is, if the scale is quite right, but here we were in 1969. Human history, we suspect, will go on in the future. And what tools will we have 1,000 years from now? It certainly won't be fossil fuel. So that's an interesting look at the human situation. And here's our book that explains all this in great detail. Questions. And my final professional goal is indicated in this picture. This amazing rock, which is on an island in the I can't say it in Spanish, Straits de Beagle, the Beagle Straits, the tip of south of Argentina and South America. My wife took this picture of me pushing this rock off the side of a cliff, and that's my final professional goal, and this presentation is part of it. So that's the end of this lecture. And the end of formal lectures, we have one more meeting where we have only a review and a discussion. So I'm going to end this share and go to our people, and anybody who wants to can turn on their camera and their microphone, and let's hear from you.
So, Charles, so what changed for the economists after the oil crisis in the 70s? I mean, they must have shifted somewhat on their views of economics, because I mean, it was a critical time, right? Or we just found we were able to do the fracking, and so everything was good again.
They were, that's a good question and a good partial resolution. I don't know because we published our first big paper on this in 1984, which was only 5 years after the 1979 oil crisis. And a couple of economists wrote me, but I think the main thing was by 1985, the oil price was coming back down again. And the view of the economists was that well, I'll tell you how the situation was resolved. When the oil price went up, all kinds of countries around the world, many of them in the Middle East, who knew they had oil, but it was in 1970, it was too expensive to drill for them because oil was only $3 a barrel. So when oil went up to $70, $80 a barrel, or 20 and then $80 a barrel, then they could drill, and suddenly the world was awash in oil from all kinds of countries around the world that had not previously been major oil producers. And the price came down, and the economists would say, there, the market has solved the problem. And so I think, in fact, rather than being a downer for the economists, they said, yes, we had a problem, and now the conventional economics has resolved the problem. And then every time we have an oil bump, we had a big one in 2008, for example, the economists certainly are concerned, and they have a lot of soul searching, but their soul searching in 2008, for example, did not particularly go to a biophysical perspective. And I would say gasoline is still cheap, so nobody is pushing for oil production today as an important issue.
But it's coming soon, right? To everybody.
Well, we keep saying it's around the corner, and I do believe there's a restriction in oil supply is around the corner, but it's always around the corner.
Mhm.
It's not here today. It's only when it's here today that people pay particular attention.
So and also I was wondering about when you talked about debt, and we're actually have a lien on our future at this point fossil fuel or energy production.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have to use that energy to get the energy out to pay that debt. And so it's a spiral downwards, it seems like. So at the end of it all, does it even matter if you can't pay your debt because we're all so screwed all over the world? Am I nihilistic? Is it going to be nihilistic?
The economists say, and I'm not able to answer your question very well. I mean, economists do know a lot of things, don't get me wrong. But economists say that nations can have as much debt as they want. It's not necessarily a good thing, but whereas a debt for an individual, if you have debt as an individual, it can be a very bad thing. Because if you don't pay the interest, then I don't know what we do. We don't throw people in debtor's prison anymore, but there certainly are various means that it's not a good thing to be in debt.
But if the economy collapsed, would your personal debt even matter? If the economy collapsed and the dollar wasn't worth anything, those debts probably wouldn't matter anymore.
If we get to that point, I
guess I was relating that to the economy as a whole.
There's an enormous amount of inertia in society. And that's one thing that we went through all this back in the 1970s, and we thought, I would never have thought that the economy would have held together to the degree it has to 2025. But here we are. I mean, here we are.
But we've inflated our debt tremendously. A lot of it
Yeah.
is on the back of that for sure.
Doesn't impact me day to day. Should, maybe. I mean, the present administration is trying to cut peanuts off of our expenditures to pay off this enormous, not just the debt, but the deficit each year. And the deficit just keeps increasing. Now, the only way to pay off that deficit is to increase taxes. And I'm all for increasing the taxes enormously on the wealth. What does Elon Musk need all that billions of dollars for?
Well,
Right?
they market their position as, taxing the wealthy will drive the economy to stagnation because we
Ah,
need them to reinvest that money.
would you
That's
say
what they've
that
been
for its
saying.
time, the economy in 1950 was stagnant? No, it was growing much more than it was now, and the rich were taxed better than 90%.
But that's how they sell it, is you won't have jobs
Well, you
if
listen
you
how I
tax
tell
the
it.
rich.
I
I
I
know, but
I
nobody's
tell it with
listening.
facts.
And it
I
must be
tell it
part
with
of,
facts.
and it must, that trickle down effect, I mean, that must be kind of the current economist thinking as well,
Well, I'm
because
trying to
they're
tell you,
part and
I think
parcel.
that how most economists think is wrong.
Right. No, I get it.
There
I
you have
get
it.
it. I'm
So,
not advocating. I'm just saying what you hear out there. That's why
well,
they've told us for 50 years now, or how many ever it's getting to be that they're not going to tax the wealthy because it hurts us. And they've made people
no,
believe
it's
that.
because the wealthy have such control. They give what is it, $5,000 a day to every senator because our
Yeah,
political
Prime
officials of necessity are bought. Because
Minister, again, that's the way I
if they
said,
don't take this money from which rich donors, they cannot possibly be reelected. And that's
Right.
a flaw with our government.
Right.
Okay, David, next question.
Thank you.
Diana, good thinking.
Thanks.
David.
Hey, Charles, thanks for the presentation. I have a question in the sense that looking for a ray of sunshine here. Is there an alternative to the energy sources that we're pursuing now, like solar energy, that represents some sort of future energy source that helps alleviate the loss of other energy sources? Do you see that as something that's going to be, the savior here?
I think it will be very, very difficult for many reasons to replace diesel. Um, and if you want to understand why I think that, read Alice's book that I showed a picture of. Alice Friedemann, When Trucks Stop Running, just as a starter. But and when there's a really wonderful series on PBS. If you watch PBS and especially if you have their passport, you can go on and get this Energy Horizons. I don't know if anybody saw it, but I'm in the first one and the last one, and the sixth series on renewables. And I'm totally in favor of renewables, but even in this rather optimistic program in Oregon, which is a good place to do renewables for various reasons. They're only talking about 20% of our energy, which is the electricity. That the other 80% for the nation, at least, is other kinds of energy, not electricity. So it's all of the renewables is to produce electricity. Then you might talk about displacing gasoline with battery powered automobiles, and that's fine. But trucks is a much more difficult issue because then you have to spend most of your energy moving batteries. And that technology is changing, maybe, and so forth and so on. And we don't have a really good energy assessment of any of this. So I can't tell you what is going to be in my desk, my electronic desk, about. I get stuff virtually every day on some new technology and another email every day, often by very sophisticated analyses of why we can't possibly replace petroleum with other types of energy. And quite frankly, we don't know yet. I thought Biden had a pretty good program. We might as well at least give it a shot, see what we can do. Nuclear is another possibility. There are obviously some issues with that. A technology I think needs a lot more examination is deep geothermal. You can drill because of the new oil fracking technologies. If you go down now, oil wells are normally 2 miles deep. If you go down 4 miles, the earth is warm enough so that if you shoot in a closed loop pentane down there, a hydrocarbon, you can make a closed loop that can make at the surface in a heat exchanger, you can make highly pressurized, hyperpressurized steam and run very good turbines. And you can do that in theory just over 80% of the Earth's crust. And you can make a lot of energy without radioactive waste, and without some of the problem with most renewables as we have them now is the intermittency. And the intermittency, if anybody wants to look at this, I've got a very good presentation by my friend Pedro Prieto. You know, Spain just had a big blackout, and it's probably because there was too much solar, too much. And it led to a cascade of problems having to do with matching the frequency and so forth. And when people look at the cost of solar, they don't look at the cost of backups or some kind of compensation, because the demand is usually greatest at 6 p.m. when people go home and turn on their air conditioners and turn on their whatevers. And that's when the solar, of course, is disappearing. And so that's a big, big problem in California, by the way, and probably Oregon. And you're going to match the frequencies of all these different inputs, and it's very, very sophisticated, very complicated. And if you want to go there, we can go there, but that's not what this course is about at the moment. So all I want to tell you is the transition to renewables is very, very difficult.
I see it's challenging. Hey, thanks for answering the question. Appreciate it.
If we had done it with nuclear, as I thought we were before 3 Mile Island, we might have it resolved with nuclear now. But I raise this question. People worry about energy mostly from the production point of view, but I worry about energy at the other end of the wires because it allows us to transform nature. And I think it's important for humans to live within a greater milieu of nature, because where we change it so it's human dominated in whatever way, usually there's all kinds of feedbacks we're not looking for that come in. And one, for example, that worries me very much at the moment is our impact on insects. Insect populations around the world are decreasing dramatically. And just to give you an example, I'm a fly fisherman, and fly fisherman is dependent upon the so-called hatches of the different species of mayflies. And in the Catskills, my favorite place to fish, the main fly for the end of April is the Hendrickson's. Is Ephemerella subvaria. Okay, you know, a species of mayfly, there were no hatches this spring. That's never happened. Now, my fly fisherman buddies back in New York are just apoplectic. You know, what the hell is going on? Now, and they say insectivorous birds are down. So I worry about those things a lot. And they're not exactly resolvable by some energy technology. I don't know what they're resolved. But the human impact on the earth, Ed Wilson, a good thinker on this, says we should turn over half the world at least to nature. I like that. Okay, Meg. Can't hear you.
Yeah, just turn
Now
that
I
on.
can.
So it seems like, okay, two-part question. It seems like the current administration's policies are, are based on bunkers and colonization, that they've actually given up trying to control this, it seems to me. What's happening?
They've given up trying to what?
Control the effects of well, definitely climate change, but their solution is drill baby drill. But from what you've taught us, there's going to be a diminishing return there, so it's not going to work for very long. So is there, my first question, is there anything that they're doing that you approve of? But B, it seems like you've pointed us in. Oh, also, I think they're counting on depopulation, simply because if you take away healthcare, if you take away basic subsistence, people will die, and that will ultimately decrease our energy use. So what would be, I mean, you're talking about geothermal. What would you focus on completely to try to solve this overwhelming problem of a downswing in energy availability? How would you focus it? How would you frame it?
Well, I certainly would not cut food supplies to hungry people.
Uh-huh.
I would now first of all, you're putting me in a situation I don't like to be in. And you're doing the same thing my students have done for 50 years. And they said, you know more about energy than anybody else. Tell us what to do. And I always was uncomfortable with that. And I think I mentioned that the very first energy project I was involved in, I ended up impacting Cree Indians in northern Quebec. And killing, I mean, not me, and certainly not deliberately, but that was the net effect of what we did. And so I've always been leery of that, but okay, I'm 82, what the hell, I'll take the bait. And I'll say, this is what I would do. Human birth rates around the world, except for sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia, are decreasing. And apparently the way that works, if that's your objective, and that would be my objective for sure, is you give women options in life besides being barefoot and pregnant. And so that would probably be my biggest push. I would certainly continue USAID. I've had many, many graduate students from foreign countries over the years, dozens of them, and many of them said the reason they came to, and very bright kids, really wonderful students, and and with high standards of what they were doing, and they would say to me, when I was a boy and I was in such and such a country, and we were starving, and there would be bags of food that would come that would say, gift of the people of the United States. And that was the most positive thing for the United States in my country. So I think it's really stupid to stop distributing food in that way. But I would make certainly give as many options as possible for women to have other issues in their life, and I guess I would support all forms of birth control, only voluntarily. Make that readily available, and see whether or not we can get on top of the population issue without coercive means. I don't like coercive means at all. And with energy, I would continue what we started, but it's not nearly enough. As I mentioned, I'm very interested in developing the technology of deep geothermal. Should we do nuclear, which we know how to work and which I believe is safe if done properly? I'm not anti-nuclear, but I'm saying why not take the money and develop the renewables that don't have these possibly terrible off problems. And I would work very hard to distribute the wealth that is produced much more equitably, including you don't want to discourage incentives for people to work. So I'm not interested in giving people, but I would make healthcare free and universal. You know, I've gotten, when I get sick in other countries like Argentina, I went into a hospital and they patched me up and did a lot of really high quality healthcare on me. And then when I'm ready to walk out, I said, where's the financial, I'm ready to pay for my healthcare. And they didn't even have an office I could go to. I mean, it's just provided the healthcare. And why we can't do it, I don't know. And some other things I don't know.
Do you, let me ask this, it's slightly different also. Is there any way to develop, like, if you have a house, you have sunlight, okay, people have put on solar panels and you're indicating there's just a lot of that kind of problem. But do you see any technologies that are sort of just micro technologies that each person could use? For instance, when you're using your car, you could be out in the sun and have solar panels on your roof. Riding a bicycle, you could create energy through friction. Just really small micro things that people, are there any promising technologies there?
I need all my energy to ride downtown and back, so there's no net from a 82-year-old man on a bicycle, but I think solar panels on your roof, I mean, we're lucky we've got south-facing roof here. And I've got 31 solar panels on my roof and generate more energy than I use. I mean, in the house only. Okay, I think a solar panel might be the best personal thing a person can use, but I don't think I put on the panels 2 years ago, and I'm not going to live long enough to see the net energy return on my solar panels. So, in a sense, I'm doing it for whoever's going to live here next. And after 25 years, I understand I have to replace the solar panels. And already one of the 31 panels failed. So that has to be incorporated in the things. And if you want to see the problems, send me an email, chall@esf.edu, and ask me about my friend Pedro's assessment of the solar situation. We wrote a book together on the EROI of the solar system in Spain and found out that the energy return on investment was quite low. And it would be negative if you included the backups and all the stuff to do with the intermittency of the solar. And that's caused a big stink in the solar community. A lot of people have fought us on that one. But what else can you do personally? Well, you cannot eat meat, but I eat meat partly because I'm a diabetic and it's a lot easier to hit my targets, and that's how I was raised. And I haven't used a jet plane. I used to fly all over the world, but I haven't been on a plane for many years. I do travel within Oregon to go camping. I have a Prius, but I also have a 4Runner. And we just downsized our camping trailer. I can't deal with tents anymore.
Well, I guess, I mean, you've said a lot of good things, but I guess I was just curious as if there's anything new in the way of capturing our own personal energy that we create
No,
and
you're
recycle.
not strong enough. You're a 60 watt, you're probably a 40 watt light bulb. Look at it this way. Here's the unbelievable difference in the use of fossil fuel. Let's say you want to use your own energy, and I assume you take showers and use water in your house and maybe garden, whatever. So let's say you live on a river. Nice clean water flows by your house. So you're going to hire a person, a good, strong person. I used to be that person, but I'm not anymore. And it's a 100 watt light bulb. And you're going to have them go down with 2 buckets and take water out of the river and walk up 3 flights of stairs. Excuse me. And put the water in a tank in the roof so you can have showers and wash the dishes and whatever else you do. So I'm eating a lozenge here. A Halls, by the way, lozenge. I get 1/10 of a penny on every one of these sold. No, I don't. I have no idea what Hall makes these. So you hire them for 10 hours at 100 watts an hour. That's 1 kilowatt hour of energy. One strong person working for 10 hours, 1 kilowatt hour. How much would you have to pay that worker? 50 bucks, 80 bucks for 10 hours, 80 bucks, maybe 100. Well, let's say along comes somebody with an electric motor, electric pump, says, look, I got this electric pump that'll do 1 kilowatt hour of work, i.e. lift the same amount of water to your attic, and it'll cost you 7 cents. So your energy is so small compared to the energy you take for granted from fossil fuel. So the answer is you can make a big difference by using less, but you can't make much of a difference. You can ride a bike and put a generator on it. You might as well, but what do you get out of it? A very small light bulb. Compared to, I assume you cook and clean and whatever else you do, all these energy intensive processes. But if once you get in your car, do you drive your car? Well, your energy meter goes, and I don't say you shouldn't drive your car. I have no shoulds.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
And we all use energy to improve the quality of our life. And if you don't have a good quality of life, why bother? Peggy, I don't know why I'm coughing.
So I'm just so appreciative of everything you're talking about and your specialties. It's great. I live in Washington. I used to live in Ashland, and I came to Ollie, but I'm still a member. But I'm on the leadership team of something we call the Green Team up here, which we're trying to educate people in the community. Could I ever have you speak up here by Zoom to people? I just think your information is wonderful. It would only be like for an hour, and it would be on Zoom, and we could have a community. I'd love to share this information. It's so important, and you're so good.
I'm retired.
Oh.
My ego is easily stroked. I would love to.
Oh, you'd be so great. Just even an hour.
But I would like to say the way to do this most efficiently. What part of Washington are you at?
In Lacey, right next to Olympia.
Okay.
And then we've got a really, big community here, 1,200 people. And most of the people are really environmentally interested. But, it's like I'm tackling all these things, like people still spray with pesticides and stuff when I'm trying to get them to not do it and to go to other things, and, educating them with films and speakers. But, it's so many people just.
What would be,
No.
And I say this to you and to anyone, I'm readily available for whatever.
Yeah.
I'm free.
Well, you don't, I mean, I would even reimburse you, but I think we just need to share this information more. And it's just, I don't know why people don't get
that's
it.
the objective of the rest of my life.
Yeah, mine too.
And
yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about it because I just really appreciate everything you're saying. It's important.
the best way to do this, Peggy,
Yeah.
first of all, my wife is from Washington. She'd love for me to have some influence. She's from Yakima, but
Okay. Well, and we're pretty environmentally like Oregon,
the best thing would be if we could give them something to watch first and then ask me questions rather
Okay.
than me
Okay.
trying to.
All right. And we can talk about this, not not right now, but I'd love to do it. So should I email you, talk to you by phone
Absolutely.
or what? Okay. Thank you.
And there is somebody else, an important person, I say, whose objective is like yours and who wants to put all of whatever I've got to say into a book et cetera in due time. And
That's good.
I don't know. It's like Mahler. Remember Mahler?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'd love to conduct my symphonies in 50 years. And Leonard Bernstein came along and made both of them famous.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to give my lectures in 50 years where everybody presumably will understand that ERI has been declining and it's got them on a bind at that point.
Yeah. Well, anyway, should I email you or call you or what?
Email me.
Okay. Okay.
Or Zoom. Why don't we Zoom?
We could Zoom. Yeah, we could do that. Okay. Well, we'll talk about it, but
If
thank
you
you.
want to, you just stay on the Zoom right now and we begin our conversation.
Okay. I'll do that. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have a question or anything? It's officially the end of our thing. I hope I'm not too depressing.
No, the world is
Not
right now.
what I'm trying to do. Peggy, can send me your email and because I think I need to close the whole thing.
Okay, I do. And I have a meeting I have to go to. So let's talk later. I'll give you you
Okay.
have my email in here too. It's Peggy Me.
It's best if you send me one.
I will do that. Okay. All right.
Anybody have any final question?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being interested.
Yep.
Marianne, are you good and healthy now?
It's never not healthy.
Good.
Okay. Leave.
Well, I'm 82 and basically healthy. I can hardly believe it. A lot of my friends from the past are leaving us. It's very sad. Okay, goodbye to everybody. See you next week.